The first time the floodlights died in the trench, I thought it was just another malfunction, until something brushed the glass from the outside. Down here 5 miles beneath the surface, silence doesn't mean safety. It means something is listening. They told me there were 11 rules to follow. If I wanted to make it back alive, simple procedures every diver memorized before the descent. But no one ever explained what happens when one of those rules breaks itself. I remember the first time I saw it happen, and the sound it made when it realized we were still breathing. I used to think the first rule was just common sense, a safety policy meant to scare rookies. Never dive alone after 2,300 hours. That's what it said on the laminated sheet taped beside the airlock. The captain recited it like a prayer before every descent, his voice flat from repetition. Down here time blurs. We only know it's late when the ocean starts to sound different, like it's breathing through the hull. Most nights our shifts ended long before then, but that evening the repair alarms kept blinking red. One of the floodlights on the observation ridge had gone dark, and the camera feeds showed nothing but static. "It'll take 5 minutes," I told Kai, my partner, trying to sound casual. He shook his head. "Not after 2,300, you know the rule." I laughed, because that's what we all did when fear showed its teeth. The trench was silent when the hatch opened. My comms filled with the slow hum of the support cable unspooling into blackness. Light from the station faded after only a few meters, leaving my suit lamps to carve thin tunnels through the dark. Every training session warned about Rule 1, and yet the moment I drifted away from the platform, I felt that pull, the strange curiosity that makes you forget why rules exist. I spoke into the mic just to hear a voice, even if it was my own. "Surface connection stable. Visibility low, approaching ridge." Static answered. Then Kai's half whisper. "Copy that, don't go past the marker." His tone carried something I'd never heard before, hesitation. I remember thinking he sounded like he was talking to someone standing behind me. The ridge was only 20 meters ahead, a jagged line where the seafloor dropped into endless dark. The broken floodlight hung from its mount like a snapped bone. As I reached for it, my helmet display flickered. Pressure reading, normal. Oxygen, normal. Heart rate spiking. I told myself it was fine. Then the comms clicked again, and I heard my own voice say, "Visibility low, approaching ridge." I froze. I hadn't spoken. There's a reason Rule 1 forbids solo dives. The instructors say it's about panic and hallucination, about how isolation bends perception. But that moment, hearing my voice echo back with a half-second delay, and a tone that wasn't quite mine, I knew the rule meant something else. I whispered Kai's name, but only the same distorted version of my own voice answered. The light fixture finally came free, a heavy metal frame coated in sediment. I turned to signal the return, but the cable behind me felt tight, as if snagged. My suit sensors showed tension, yet nothing was visible when I looked back. For a second the darkness seemed to have weight, like it was pressing its face against my visor. I tugged once, hard, and the cable came loose too easily. "Kai, I'm heading back," I said, trying to keep my tone calm. The response came instantly. "Copy that," but this time it didn't sound like static. It sounded like two voices layered together, one of them breathing where no air existed. Every meter upward felt slower than the last. My depth gauge blinked erratically, numbers reversed, counting deeper instead of higher. "Interface malfunction," I muttered, tapping the display. The digits steadied, but when I checked my timer, it was 23:17, later than it should have been. I realized I'd lost 8 minutes somewhere in that dark. The hatch lights shimmered above, faint halos cutting through the murk. Relief almost made me forget Rule 1. But as I approached the airlock, something drifted beside the frame. A shadow, same size as me, matching my movements perfectly. I stopped. It stopped. I raised a hand. It raised one too, but slower, like it was learning. "Kai, open the lock," I said. Silence. The shadow tilted its head, waiting. Then the comms crackled again. Surface connection stable, visibility low, the same phrase, the same cadence, but now whispered directly inside the suit. The outer hatch opened on its own. The emergency lights pulsed red, washing the chamber in faint color. As I stepped inside, I felt water swirl around my boots. Wrong pressure, wrong sequence. Someone had triggered the flood cycle manually. The doors began to close, and for a split second I saw another diver already standing in the chamber, helmet fogged from inside. When the inner hatch sealed, the water drained fast, slapping my suit with pressure shifts. My ears rang. I ripped off the helmet. The chamber was empty. No footprints, no second helmet, just the faint drip of condensation from the vents. I radioed Kai again, but the channel was dead. Only that same low breathing answered back. Later, when I climbed to the control deck, Kai was asleep in his chair, headset off, monitors quiet. He blinked at me in confusion when I shook him awake. "You just got back?" he asked. "You said you aborted the dive at 22:50. I thought you were already in decon." My stomach turned cold. The floodlight video feed flickered on one of the screens, showing the ridge, still dark, still broken, and a figure drifting just above it. I didn't tell him what I saw. I just nodded and muttered, "Yeah, must have been the system glitch." But the recording kept looping that single frame of the diver near the ridge, suit lights pulsing like a heartbeat. On the timestamp, the dive time read 23:27. That's when I understood why they wrote "Never dive alone" after 2300 hours in capital letters. Because sometimes, when the station thinks there's only one of you outside, something else decides to join the count. And if it finishes before you make it back, the system won't open the hatch again. I left the control deck a few minutes after that glitch, pretending the tremor in my hands was just leftover adrenaline. Kai was already logging the next day's dive schedule, acting like nothing had happened. When I passed him, he gave a lazy salute and said, "Don't forget rule 2, man. Lights stay on the trench." I wanted to laugh, but the screen behind him still showed the frozen image of that extra diver near the ridge. The system timestamp kept blinking, trying to overwrite itself. Down in maintenance, the hum of the generators felt louder than usual, a deep metallic heartbeat filling the corridor. The floodlight circuits ran through here, thick cables feeding energy to the external towers. Each one was marked with a yellow tag that read, "Keep the floodlights facing the trench at all times." I used to think it was about visibility, keeping cameras clear for research, but I'd heard rumors that when those lights turn inward, things start moving where cameras can't see. By 22 o'clock the next night, the sea outside looked like smoke. Every few seconds a wave of silt drifted past, hiding the viewports. Kai and I checked the controls twice before the captain ordered us to angle the lights deeper. "There's movement near Sector 4, he said, his voice tight, "something big. Don't lose sight of it." The system groaned as the beams tilted, shafts of white disappearing into the rift. For a heartbeat, I thought I saw something turn away from the light, long, thin, jointed wrong, but the reflection vanished before I could focus. Kai muttered, "Why are we even watching that side? It's nothing but rock." I didn't answer. My eyes stayed fixed on the monitor that showed our own shadow stretching over the seafloor. When one of the floodlights flickered, the shadow split into two. The second outline lingered, a few inches behind mine, head cocked as if listening. I blinked, and it was gone. Later, when we switched to standby power, the main lights began to swivel on their own. The motors whined, metal grinding as the beams drifted away from the trench toward the station's hull. I slammed the control toggle back, but the rotation kept going. Kai cursed and pulled the manual breaker. The lights froze, halfway between the trench and our own reflection in the viewport glass. The room fell into half-darkness. Then the cameras lit up with movement, something crawling along the edge of the ridge, illuminated by the few beams still pointing outward. We stared without speaking. The shape was huge but wrong, like a shadow with edges. It paused when the beam hit it full on, limbs folding in strange rhythm, and then retreated until the light faded. That's when the power readout spiked, all systems drawing maximum load even though no one had touched a switch. The station's metal skin vibrated, a deep hum that seemed to come from outside, not within. The captain's voice came through the intercom, calm but strained. "Realign the lights. Now you know the rule." Kai and I exchanged a look. I pulled the lever again. The motors resisted like something was holding them in place, then jerked free, the beams cutting back toward the black maw of the trench. The hum stopped instantly, replaced by silence so heavy it made my ears ring. We logged the incident, wrote it off as mechanical drift, but neither of us slept. Around 3 o'clock I woke to find Kai standing by the viewport, staring into the dark. The emergency light painted his face red. "The beams aren't steady," he whispered. "Something's pushing against them." I told him to back away, but he didn't move. His reflection in the glass looked wrong. Too tall, arms slightly delayed when he turned. The next shift, the captain sealed off Sector 4 entirely. We were ordered not to approach the outer corridors after lights out. On my inspection route, I saw that someone had painted over every sign of Rule 2, except the one near the airlock, as if hiding the reminder could erase what was outside. That night the floodlights blinked once, twice, and then every sensor on the lower deck recorded a brief drop in temperature, 5 degrees in less than a second. When the lights came back, one camera showed the trench glowing faintly from within, like a city seen through fog. "Reflection artifact," Kai muttered, forcing a grin. But when he reached for the control pad, the feed cut to static. A few seconds later, the station lights dimmed again. From somewhere in the dark water came a low vibration that felt like speech through the metal. I remembered Rule 2, and fought the instinct to turn the cameras inward. Instead, I locked the floodlights in position, all beams stabbing directly into the abyss. The sound stopped. For a long moment the ocean was still. Then something brushed the hull, soft and deliberate, and a new shadow appeared at the edge of the light, one shaped exactly like our own station. The captain's voice cracked over the radio. "Nobody touch the alignment. Whatever you do, don't let those lights turn away." We obeyed, but I couldn't stop watching the twin outline drifting just beyond the glow, mimicking every movement of the real station like a reflection waiting for the power to fail again. When my shift ended, I wrote in the logbook, "Floodlights steady, no anomalies detected." It was a lie, but the truth felt heavier than the pressure outside. I left the control room with the hum of the generators still in my bones, whispering the words under my breath. "Keep the floodlights facing the trench at all times." Because now I knew the rule wasn't meant to help us see what's out there. It was to stop whatever's out there from seeing us. It happened 3 nights later. By then the station's air had grown stale and metallic, like we were breathing inside an old coin. The generators hummed, the floodlights burned through the dark, and everyone walked around pretending not to hear the faint scraping that sometimes echoed through the hull. The captain told us it was thermal stress, just the metal expanding and contracting, but we all knew better. Down here, sounds have weight. They don't travel far, but when they do, they stick to you. Kai had stopped joking around. He spent most of his shift staring at the sonar screen, watching small blips that appeared for a second, then vanished just before he could lock on. The others called them phantoms, artifacts from the trench currents. But I saw his eyes the night. One of those blips matched our station's exact speed and position. That wasn't current, that was something following. The knock came at 2:37, 3 sharp taps against the hull, not random creaks, not pipes, but deliberate, like knuckles against metal. We froze. Kai turned slowly toward me, his face pale under the emergency lights. The sound came again, closer this time. Tap, tap, tap. It echoed down the corridor, faint but rhythmic, moving from one section to another. Then silence. I whispered, "External debris." He shook his head. "There's no current tonight." And then through the intercom, the captain's voice, If you hear it again, don't answer. Don't look. Don't speak. You all know Rule 3. The words chilled me more than the water pressing against the walls. It wasn't a command. It was a warning. A plea. That's when I realized. Nobody ever told me what happens if you do answer. Around 3:10, the knocks started again. Slower this time. Tap, tap, tap. Always 3. Always moving, circling the station. We muted the intercom to keep the sound from traveling, but the vibration still reached through the metal floor into our boots. It felt like someone dragging fingers across the hall, feeling their way along. Then it stopped outside the viewport. Kai stood up. Maybe it's a loose cable, he muttered, half to himself, stepping closer. The glass was black beyond the reflection of our own faces. He leaned in, squinting, breath fogging the pain. Then something knocked back. 3 times, same rhythm. I grabbed his arm, whispering, "Don't." He froze, eyes wide, staring into his reflection. "It's me," he whispered. "It looks like," but I pulled him away before he could finish. I hit the console switch, dropping the viewport shutters. The metal door slammed shut with a hollow clang. For a few seconds there was nothing but the hiss of the oxygen vents and the pounding of our hearts. Then, faintly through the wall, tap, tap, tap. The next morning, one of the engineers, Harlow, didn't show up for breakfast. His bunk was empty, his dive suit gone. The airlock logs showed a brief cycle around 4 o'clock, no external mission recorded. When we checked the footage, the camera feed was pure static, like someone had wiped the tape, but the timestamp stayed, 4:02 to 4:04, exactly 3 minutes. We found Harlow's helmet later, drifting near the hull. The visor was cracked from the inside. Nobody spoke about it, but everyone knew what it meant. He'd answered the knock. That night, the captain gathered us in the control room. His voice was low, the weight of exhaustion pressing each word flat. "The trench listens," he said. "It mimics. It learns. Whatever knocks wants to be let in. And if you open that door even a second, it won't be you who comes back." He paused, eyes sweeping across us. "That's why Rule 3 exists. Never acknowledge it, not even by thought." I didn't sleep that night. The silence of the deep, pressed against the walls, alive and waiting. Around 2 o'clock, I woke to the faintest echo, soft, almost polite. Tap, tap, tap. I didn't move, didn't breathe. But then, it came again from inside the room. The lights flickered once. My reflection in the viewport glass didn't flicker at all. The morning after the knocks, the station felt hollow, like the air itself had forgotten how to carry sound. We were down 1 man. The corridors stretched longer than they should have, and even the hum of the generators sounded muffled, as though something outside was pressing its ear to the walls, listening. No one mentioned Harlow's name again, but his absence hung between us like a fog that never lifted. The captain looked 10 years older overnight, and when he finally spoke, his voice cracked like the metal around us. He called for a system check. The oxygen output was dropping by 3%. "It's just a valve issue," he said, though his tone made it sound like a prayer instead of a statement. The repair meant sending a diver outside to inspect the filtration grid, a simple task under normal circumstances. But nothing about the Mariana Trench was normal anymore. Kai volunteered immediately, trying to sound brave, though I could see the tremor in his hands. The captain hesitated before nodding. "Fine," he said. "But you're not going alone. Rule 4, you never dive alone, no matter what." I suited up beside him, the hiss of the pressure locks echoing in the chamber. My reflection in the glass of my helmet looked strange, almost wrong, as if the light inside my eyes came from somewhere else. The water outside was black, swallowing the beams of our headlamps like smoke. As we stepped through the airlock, the silence of the deep took over, so thick it felt alive. The cables creaked above, our only connection to the surface. "Stay close," I said. "Don't drift. Kai nodded, but his voice didn't come through the comms. We descended toward the filtration grid, the structure looming from the dark like a sunken ribcage. Silt drifted lazily past our lights. I checked my oxygen gauge. Steady. Then Kai's voice crackled faintly. "Something's wrong with my tether," he said, pulling at the line clipped to his belt. It wasn't tangled. It was slack. The current was non-existent, yet the cable floated gently, as if something below was holding it. I felt a cold pull deep in my stomach. "Reel in," I ordered. But before he could, the line jerked tight, dragging him downward. "Kai," I shouted, lunging after him. My gloves scraped the grid, metal screaming against metal. The tether stretched taut, then went still. "Kai, respond." Static. Only static. I followed the line into the dark, until it vanished into the black silt below. My lights reflected something moving, a shimmer like a hand, but too long, too pale. Then the comm crackled again, faint and broken. "It's fine. I'm fine. Just stay there. I'll check the valve." But his voice was wrong. Empty. As if something hollow was speaking through him. I froze. Rule 4 repeated in my head like a heartbeat. Never dive alone, no matter the emergency. The realization hit me. Whatever was answering wasn't Kai. He wouldn't have told me to stay behind. I started reeling the tether in, but it was lighter now, too light. When I finally pulled the end to me, the clip was still attached, but the suit at the other end was empty. No tears, no blood, just empty, as though he'd stepped out of it. The captain's voice came over the radio, strained and distant. "Surface immediately. Both of you. Now." "I can't," I said quietly. "He's gone." There was a pause. "Then you're not alone anymore," he whispered. "Get inside before it realizes you're still there." My lights flickered once, then something brushed against my leg. I didn't look. I forced myself not to. I followed the cable back toward the station, each kick heavier than the last. The shadows pressed closer, following. When I reached the airlock, I slammed the inner seal and didn't breathe until the pressure normalized. I ripped off my helmet and stumbled to the floor. The room was empty. No one had answered my entry call. The silence stretched. Then from the intercom, Kai's voice whispered, "You left me." I turned slowly toward the viewport. Outside, a second suit drifted past, its helmet light still on. Inside the glass, something moved. It wasn't him. It was watching. That night, we gathered again. The captain looked at each of us and said, "We've lost 2 men. The rules exist for a reason. The trench copies what it wants. When you go out there alone, it finds room to make another of you." He rubbed his face, shaking his head. "From now on, no one leaves this station without me. Not one step." But as I lay in my bunk, I couldn't sleep. My comm light blinked faintly. A private channel, Kai's frequency. Against every instinct, I listened. "It's cold," the voice whispered. Distant, muffled by static. "You left me down here, but I can see you." The signal ended. The lights flickered, and from outside the viewport, 2 helmet lights shone back, one above, one below, waiting. Sleep stopped existing after that night. We took shifts in pairs, but the air grew thinner, and the hum of the machinery more erratic. Every few hours, someone swore they heard breathing through the pipes, or faint tapping that traced their footsteps through the hall. The captain stopped arguing with anyone who mentioned it. He just nodded and told us to keep your helmets sealed at all times. It wasn't about pressure anymore. It was about keeping something out. I started recording the sounds during my shifts. At first it was harmless. Vibrations, current, metal strain. But around 2:15 every night, a new sound joined. A faint voice, not words at first, just whispers that mimicked breathing, timing itself to mine. I told myself it was feedback from my comm unit. But then, one night, the voice spoke. It said, "You're late." My own voice. The words froze me where I sat. The tone, the inflection. everything identical to mine, only slightly delayed, as if echoing from a few seconds in the future. I stared at the comm panel, heart thudding against my ribs. Kai's old channel light blinked once, then went dark. The voice spoke again, closer this time. "You shouldn't be alone here." I turned off the mic, ripped the headset from my ears, and still, I heard it, faint, right behind me. "You left me." I remembered Rule 5 then. The captain had read it once, his voice trembling. "Never respond to a voice that sounds like yours." He hadn't explained why, but now, I didn't need him to. I stood slowly, scanning the corridor. Every surface reflected some part of me. Helmet glass, monitor screens, the dark shimmer of the viewport. For a second, I saw movement in one reflection. My own face, smiling when I wasn't. I backed away from the console, but the reflection didn't follow. It stayed, grinning faintly. Then it raised its hand and pressed its palm to the glass. "You left me," it whispered again, and this time I saw the words form on my own breath inside the visor. I shut my eyes and forced myself not to answer. The next morning, the captain asked why I'd disabled my mic feed. I didn't tell him. He already knew. He looked exhausted, his hands trembling, as he poured black coffee into a tin mug. "It's getting closer," he said. "The trench remembers. It doesn't just copy the living, it studies them. Once it has your voice, it can make you listen." He stared into the mug, not drinking. "That's why Rule 5 exists. If you answer it, you give it permission to take your place." That day, we lost another crew member, Dr. Bell. She was the only one left who still believed in logical explanations. I found her in the communications hub, staring at an open frequency feed. She looked up at me and whispered, "He says he's me." The feed crackled with a low hum, and through it came a voice. Bell's voice, calm, clear. "Don't listen to her. She's the copy." Before I could react, Bell lunged for the console, slamming the transmission shut. "Do you see?" she said, shaking. "It's learning faster." We locked the hub for the night. Still, around 3 o'clock, her voice returned over the intercom, whispering through static, "Please let me in. It's cold out here." The captain ordered everyone to stay away from the doors. He repeated the rule over the loudspeaker, his voice breaking. "Do not respond to your own voice, no matter what it says." But Belle didn't make it through the night. When we checked her cabin, the door was sealed from the inside, her comm headset resting neatly on the bed. The room smelled faintly of salt water, though the hatch hadn't been opened. Written across the fogged window, in perfect handwriting, were 4 words: "You finally heard me." The captain gathered what was left of us. 4 now. He didn't shout this time. "If it can sound like you, it can think like you," he said. "And if it can think like you, it only needs time before it replaces you." He looked at me longer than the others. Maybe because I hadn't told him everything. Maybe because he already suspected the thing speaking with my voice wasn't done. That night, I stayed awake in the control room. My comm light blinked faintly again, even though the headset was unplugged. I stared at it for a full minute before the speaker came alive, crackling softly. Then my own voice, calm, confident, whispering through the static, "You did the right thing leaving me, but now you need to come back. The captain isn't real, none of them are. You're still out here." The power flickered once, and for a split second, the viewport glass reflected me, but not sitting in the chair. Standing behind it, smiling faintly. I didn't move. I didn't answer. I just watched as the reflection leaned closer, lips moving without sound, forming the same words again and again. "You left me." Then it lifted a finger and tapped the glass 3 times. Tap, tap, tap. By the next rotation, the station had gone from dim to near night. The emergency generators strained under the constant pressure, groaning like something alive inside the walls. The captain rationed power, ordering partial light cycles to conserve what little charge we had left. It made sense on paper, but when the first blackout hit, I realized that Rule 6 wasn't about saving energy. It was about survival. The darkness down here wasn't just absence. It was presence. The first outage lasted 12 minutes. We all stayed frozen, flashlights trembling in our hands, beams cutting through the thick black water pressed against the glass. I could feel it, the way you feel another heartbeat close to yours. There was something just beyond the light, waiting for it to die completely. When the power finally returned, half the tools we'd left on the floor were gone. So was Dr. Mills. We searched every compartment, every maintenance shaft. Nothing. No signs of a breach. No body, not even a torn glove. But when I checked the footage from the corridor cams, one frame caught my eye. Just before the blackout, Mills was walking toward the generator bay. Then, in the flash of emergency red, something walked behind her. Not quite human, taller. The frame glitched, then cut to static. When it came back, the hallway was empty, and the lights started flickering again, as if in warning. That night, the captain stood over the console, his voice shaking as he reminded us, "Keep the lights on. Darkness isn't empty down here." I didn't ask him how he knew. I didn't have to. The look in his eyes told me he'd seen what happens when the lights go out. At 3 o'clock, I woke to the low hum of the emergency alarm. My bunk light had gone dead, leaving only the dull pulse of red along the corridor walls. I reached for my flashlight. Nothing. I stepped out, feeling the metal floor vibrate beneath my boots. Every sound was amplified, as if the walls were breathing. Then I heard it, a slow scraping drag, like wet hands against the hull. It stopped right outside my door. I froze. The air felt heavier, thicker. The sound shifted, moving past the cabin toward the main hall. I followed, my fingers brushing along the cold wall to guide me. The deeper I went, the more the dark seemed to press in, swallowing sound. Then movement, a faint shimmering outline ahead. I whispered into the comm, "Captain." No reply. The outline tilted its head, as if listening, then flickered out as the backup lights returned. When the power stabilized, I wasn't alone. Kai's suit stood upright at the far end of the corridor, dripping seawater onto the floor, but the helmet was empty again. No body inside, just a hollow echo when the captain knocked on the glass. We locked it in the storage bay. By morning it was gone. The captain didn't hold meetings anymore. He just walked the halls, flashlight trembling in his hand, repeating the same thing under his breath. They move when we can't see them. They become what we've lost. The others tried to sleep through the constant hum, but the blackouts came faster now. Shorter, sharper, like breaths between words we couldn't hear. Then, one night, during the longest outage yet, I saw something that still claws at my mind. The lights died, leaving us in perfect black. No glow, no reflection, nothing. And in that absolute dark, I felt pressure, not water, not air, something closer pressing against my helmet. A whisper, my own voice. "Turn off the light." I clutched the flashlight tighter, remembering Rule 5, and refused. When the lights came back, the walls were wet, not from leaks, wet with something slick, like condensation, but thick and slow. The captain stood by the viewport, staring out. His flashlight beam trembled. "It's learning to live here," he said quietly. "Every second the lights are out, it becomes more like us." That's when I saw the reflection again. Me standing behind him, hands on his shoulders, but I was still across the room. I lunged for the generator override, slamming the manual crank, flooding the corridor with harsh white light. The reflection vanished. The captain turned, eyes wide. "You saw it too," he whispered. "Now it knows your face." We reinforced every bulb, rerouted power from the life support heaters, anything to keep the lights burning. Still, we knew it was only a matter of time. The generators couldn't hold forever. The trench wanted its darkness back, and when it finally came, When the last light burned out, I knew we wouldn't see it coming, only feel it, and in that final moment, maybe we'd realize the truth. The darkness down here wasn't hiding something. It was something. The station changed after that last blackout. Every hallway felt smaller, like the walls had shifted inward during the dark. Even the air carried a strange rhythm, a slow pulsing hum that didn't match any of the equipment. The captain stopped sleeping altogether. He'd sit by the viewport, whispering things I couldn't hear. We kept every light burning, but it didn't help. The glow only showed us how much of the dark still remained between the beams. Then people started repeating themselves. At first it was subtle, a word, a phrase said twice without realizing it. I thought it was exhaustion until I saw the captain in the galley one morning, staring at the same cold cup of coffee, mumbling, "Pressure's stable, pressure's stable, pressure's stable," over and over. His lips moved like a broken loop, eyes vacant but open. I said his name once, gently. He didn't blink. I said it again, louder this time. He turned to me, smiled and said, "Pressure's stable," in my voice. That's when I remembered Rule 7. The words rang through my head like an alarm. If someone starts repeating themselves, leave the room immediately. It wasn't superstition, it was containment. I backed away, keeping my eyes on him. His smile widened slightly, teeth too white under the flickering light. Then he whispered, "You should sit down." I didn't. I ran. I didn't look back until I was in the corridor with the door sealed behind me. The others didn't believe me at first. They said the captain was just losing his mind from stress. But by the second day, they saw it too. One of the technicians, Alvarez, was running system diagnostics when he froze mid-sentence and began whispering the same data string again and again. No errors, no stutter, just flawless repetition, like playback. We tried shaking him, shouting, even cutting power to his terminal. He didn't react until the emergency lights flickered. For a split second, he stopped speaking and turned his head toward the dark corridor. Then he smiled. "I can hear it now," he said softly, before returning to the same line again. "System pressure nominal. System pressure nominal." We locked him in the maintenance bay. That night, when we checked the feed, he was gone. The only thing left was his voice echoing through the intercom, perfectly clear. System pressure nominal. It hasn't stopped since. The next morning, I went to the captain's quarters. The door was still sealed from when I left him. No sound came from inside. When I finally forced it open, the room was empty, but the coffee cups still steamed, and written in the condensation on the viewport were 3 words, over and over, like a pattern burned into the glass. "Keep repeating, keep repeating, keep repeating." By then there were only 2 of us left, me and Kellen, the navigation officer. We agreed to stick together, always keep moving, and keep the lights bright. The hum of the generators had grown louder, like they were breathing in sync with something outside. At first I thought it was stress making me hear patterns, but then around 2 o'clock, I realized it wasn't just in my head. The hum wasn't random, it was a rhythm, and every few seconds it whispered under the drone of the engines. "Keep repeating." Kellen heard it too. He started whispering back without realizing, just a murmur under his breath. The same phrase. I snapped at him. "Stop it, don't say it." He blinked, confused, then smiled faintly. "Stop what?" His voice echoed faintly from the corridor behind him, half a second too late. "Stop what?" The lights dimmed again. My stomach dropped. I reached for the emergency breaker, slamming it back up. The room flooded with light, and Kellen was gone. In his place, the empty suit stood, water dripping from the helmet. The comms flared with static, then a voice. My voice came through. "Keep repeating." I shut off the feed and sat against the bulkhead, shaking. Rule 7 wasn't about madness. It was about infection. Whatever echoed down here wasn't copying us piece by piece. It was learning our speech, our patterns, our thoughts, and the moment we slipped, the moment we repeated ourselves, it took over the rest. Now even the systems have started repeating. The same lines of code scroll endlessly across the monitors. Maintain stability. Maintain stability. I've stopped reading them out loud. I've stopped talking altogether, except when I have to. But sometimes, in the reflection of the control screen, I see myself still talking, mouth moving, words spilling out that I can't hear. And every time I blink, it gets closer. The trench was quieter that night than I'd ever heard it. Even the hum of the subsystems seemed reluctant, like the machines themselves knew what waited outside. We'd descended nearly 11 miles below the surface, far past the last point of mapped terrain. It was supposed to be a simple cable inspection, but when the sonar started glitching, the captain ordered us to drift with minimal movement. That's when I saw the glow, faint, trembling dots shimmering far beneath us. At first, I thought it was equipment debris, reflecting the floodlight. Then the dots pulsed. Slow, rhythmic, intentional. The captain muttered over comms, "Do not approach them." His voice was low but steady, carrying that edge only fear can sharpen. Everyone on board froze. I remembered Rule 8, never swim toward the lights below. It had always sounded superstitious, something the veterans whispered over beers to scare rookies. But in that moment, watching those orbs pulse in impossible synchronization, I realized the rule wasn't a story. It was a warning left by people who hadn't made it back. Clark leaned closer to the viewport. "Looks like a colony of photoplankton," he said, though his tone betrayed him. I told him to back off, that it wasn't natural light. The way those orbs drifted, they weren't following currents. They were choosing direction. The captain ordered us to power down every non-essential system. Within seconds we sat in darkness, the only illumination coming from the slow, deliberate pulse beneath us. Each beat seemed to echo in my chest, syncing with my heart until I couldn't tell which rhythm was mine. When I blinked, the glow had multiplied. Dozens became hundreds, spread out like a city grid, an impossible geometry that stretched across the trench floor. I pressed my hand to the viewport. The glass was cold, colder than before, as if the lights were draining the warmth out of the ocean itself. "They're moving closer," Clark whispered. I didn't answer. My breath fogged the visor. It was as if the lights were climbing toward us. For every second we stayed still, they grew brighter, more defined, until I swore I saw outlines within them. At first, they looked like shapes of divers, human silhouettes, weightless and slow, but their movements were too synchronized, too deliberate, like puppets suspended by invisible strings. The captain's voice cracked through the intercom again, quiet but urgent. "No one opens the hatch. No one moves. And for God's sake, never swim toward the lights below." I wanted to ask what would happen if we did, but the fear in his voice told me I didn't want the answer. We sat there for nearly an hour, frozen in the dark. The lights pulsed faster, forming circles that spiraled outward until they filled the entire view. My ears popped, the pressure gauge flickered. Something enormous was moving beneath the lights, something that shifted the water like a continent turning in its sleep. I could feel it, even through the metal hull, a weight, a presence that made the deep feel suddenly too small. Clark started whispering to himself, a shaky mantra about light frequencies and reflection, but his voice broke off mid-sentence. He pointed at the viewport. One of the lights had detached from the pattern and was rising toward us, slow but purposeful. It hovered just beyond the glass, trembling with that same rhythmic pulse. I couldn't look away. My body leaned forward without my permission, as if gravity had inverted and the light was pulling me down. Somewhere behind me, the captain barked my name, but it sounded miles away. For a second, I thought I saw a face in that glow, a reflection maybe, or something pretending to be one. Then everything went black. When the backup power flicked on, Clark was gone. His tether hung limp by the hatch, the end frayed like something had melted through it. The pressure alarms blared briefly before cutting off again. We scanned the external cameras, but there was only darkness, and in the far distance, the faint shimmer of a single light drifting upward. It pulsed once, twice, then stopped. I wanted to believe it wasn't him. I wanted to believe Rule 8 hadn't been broken. We ascended a few meters to stabilize pressure. The sonar came back online, but it didn't show terrain anymore, only movement. Hundreds of pings below us, rising and falling like waves of heartbeat signatures. The captain killed the sonar immediately. "They can hear the signal," he said, his voice barely a whisper. I asked him what he meant. He just shook his head. "It's how they find you. They mimic what you're looking for." That's when I realized the lights weren't showing us anything. They were listening. Hours passed. I stopped checking the viewport, though the glow kept finding ways to seep through the cracks of shadow. The lights didn't need to be seen to be felt. Every few minutes, I'd feel that same rhythmic pulse behind my eyes, like a migraine that hummed in patterns. The captain stayed silent, staring at the controls, his hands shaking. Finally, he spoke more to himself than anyone. "It always starts with the lights. It ends with the reflection." Something tapped the exterior. Slow, deliberate impacts spaced evenly apart, not knocking, communicating. My breath caught as a faint beam of light slipped through the viewport again, tracing the edges of the glass like a finger. The captain whispered, "Don't move," but I already had. My eyes followed the light down, to where the darkness rippled and parted. There, deep below the shimmering veil, was movement. A vast, slow ripple that didn't belong to any current. And then I saw them. Not lights, eyes. Each one blinking out of sync, their glow fading into that endless black. I counted 7 before I lost track. They weren't looking up at us. They were looking through us. The captain slammed the control panel, flooding the sub's lower lights and blasting ballast to rise, but the engine stalled, like something massive was holding us down. My ears filled with the sound of my own pulse. No, not mine. The same steady rhythm as the lights. When we finally broke free, the ascent was silent. The pressure stabilized. The lights disappeared one by one until only darkness remained. For a moment I thought we'd made it. Then on the external cam, a faint glow blinked on beneath the sub, far below. Just one light this time, following us up like a beacon. I turned off the monitor, but the glow stayed in my eyes. I still see it when I blink. Now I understand Rule 8, never swim toward the lights below. It's not just a warning about curiosity, it's about recognition. The moment you acknowledge them, they know where you are. They learn your rhythm, and once they learn it, they never forget. The captain hasn't spoken since that night. He just sits by the viewport, eyes open, staring at the dark. Sometimes when the power flickers, I swear I see faint light reflecting off his face from below, not above. I tell myself it's a trick of the eye, but every pulse feels closer now, matching my heartbeat perfectly. And somewhere out there, in the endless silence of the trench, something is still following the sound. The morning after the lights vanished, the trench felt different, emptier, somehow aware of us. The water outside wasn't still anymore. It pulsed faintly, as though carrying the echo of a heartbeat too large to belong to anything living. The captain hadn't moved from his seat, his eyes fixed on the dead sonar screen. His silence weighed heavier than the ocean itself. I tried to reach Clark on the shortwave channel again, even though I knew he was gone. That's when the comms crackled to life with a sound that froze my blood. It was his voice. "Don't leave me down here," he said. The tone, the cadence, even the faint nervous tremor, it was Clark. I almost grabbed the mic to answer before my mind caught up with my hands. There was no possible way he could be transmitting. The sub's external line had been cut the night before. That's when I remembered Rule 9. Never answer the voices on the comms. It wasn't superstition anymore. It was protocol written by survivors. If there ever were any. I leaned back, whispering to myself that it had to be interference, maybe an echo caught in the system. But the voice came again, clearer this time. "You said you wouldn't leave me." The captain finally stirred, his eyes hollow but focused. "Don't speak," he murmured. "It's not him." I wanted to argue, to tell him I knew Clark's voice better than anyone. But then the voice changed mid-sentence, like someone else was trying on his tone, slipping into it, testing how it fit. My skin prickled. The signal wasn't coming from outside, it was coming from below us. I turned the dial to another frequency, but the voice followed. Static bled into words, warped and distant, like dozens of people whispering through a single throat. "You shouldn't have looked at the lights," it said. My hand trembled on the control board. The captain reached over and switched off the transmitter entirely. But the voices didn't stop. They were still there, faint, buried deep in the sub's internal systems, whispering beneath the hum of power. "You saw us," one of them said, almost tenderly. "Now we see you." I couldn't tell if the others heard it too. The captain sat motionless, his face pale in the low light. The engineer, Matteo, muttered something about electromagnetic bleed from the trench's minerals, but even he didn't sound convinced. We were thousands of feet below any plausible range for civilian transmissions, and yet, every few minutes, the comms would flicker on with that same soft voice calling my name. Always mine, never anyone else's. At first it sounded pleading, then it grew patient. "You're close now," it said. "We can bring him back." I almost believed it. The way it spoke, calm, confident, gentle, it felt human, familiar, like a memory of comfort filtered through a nightmare. The captain must have seen the look in my eyes, because he grabbed my wrist. "Don't listen," he hissed. "That's how they get in. That's why Rule 9 exists." His words barely registered. All I could hear was the voice, soft and coaxing, saying things Clark never would have known, things I'd never told anyone. "How do you know that?" I whispered before realizing I'd spoken aloud. Matteo turned sharply, his expression twisted between fear and disbelief. "You heard it too?" he asked. Before I could respond, the lights flickered. For a second, everything went dark, and in that void, the comms flared again. No static this time, just breathing. Slow, deep, deliberate. Then a new voice, one that didn't sound human at all. It spoke in a rhythm that made my spine ache, each word vibrating through the metal walls of the sub. "If you answer," it said, "you'll open the door." The captain lunged forward, ripping out the main comms cable with a wrenching twist. Sparks lit the cabin. The air smelled of ozone and panic. We sat in the silence that followed, the only sound the slow hiss of the oxygen filters. My ears rang from the sudden quiet. Then faintly, beneath that mechanical breath, the whisper returned, not through the speakers this time, but from somewhere inside the hull. "You already answered," it said. "Now we can hear you." Matteo began to shake uncontrollably, muttering prayers in a language I didn't understand. He said he heard his wife's voice calling his name through the floor, as if she were beneath us. I didn't want to believe him, but then I heard it too, my mother's voice, soft and steady, telling me to come home. The sound wasn't real, I knew that, but the longer we sat there, the more real it became. The trench has a way of using what's inside you. It doesn't need to invent fear, it just borrows your memories and speaks them back. Hours passed without a word between us. The captain refused to restore power to the comms, but the whispering never really stopped. Sometimes it was laughter. Sometimes it was humming. Sometimes it was my own voice, repeating the things I'd said earlier that day. It felt like being trapped inside a mirror that could speak. I started to think maybe we hadn't escaped the lights after all, that they'd simply found a new way to reach us. The captain scribbled something in his logbook and tore out the page before I could see it. I only caught one sentence as he folded it into his jacket pocket. "The voices learn faster when you listen." By the next shift, Matteo was gone. His harness was still attached to the wall, but he wasn't in it. The airlock was sealed. No alarms had sounded. The only sign of him was the faint echo of his voice on the comms, laughing quietly from the static. "It's beautiful down here," he said. "You should see what's waiting." The captain didn't react. He just stared at the glass and whispered the rule to himself over and over. Never answer the voices on the comms. Never answer, never. We drifted in silence for what felt like days, though the clock insisted it was only hours. Every so often, the emergency channel would blink. No signal, no source, just a call sign marked Clark. I couldn't bring myself to turn it off. Part of me still hoped he was out there, waiting, trapped in some unseen pocket of the trench. But the rational part of me, the part that still believed in survival, knew better. You don't hear voices down here, you invite them, and once they know your name, they never stop using it. When I finally tried to sleep, I left the comms off and the lights dimmed, but as I drifted into uneasy dreams, a sound crept through the silence again, so faint it could have been imagined. My name, repeated softly, as if from the other side of the hull. And then after a pause, something else. "We're almost at the last rule," it said. "Aren't you curious what it is?" I woke to the captain standing over me, pale and shaking. "Don't listen," he whispered. "They're getting closer." Then for the first time since we descended, I realized what he was afraid of. It wasn't the trench. It wasn't the darkness. It was what happens when you forget Rule 9. Because once you answer them, they don't stop calling. By the time the voices stopped, the silence felt worse. It wasn't real silence anymore. It was waiting. Every sound we made seemed borrowed, temporary, like we were speaking over something else's breath. The sub drifted without direction now. Power rationed. Oxygen thinning. I hadn't seen the captain sleep in over 30 hours. He sat near the viewport, eyes locked on the endless black outside. Every so often, I'd catch his reflection in the glass. Unmoving, pale and wrong. The eyes didn't blink when he did. That's when I remembered Rule 10. Never trust reflections in the glass. I'd heard the stories before. Down here the water pressure does strange things to light. Bends it, refracts it, makes it seem alive. But this wasn't about distortion. The rule wasn't about optical illusion. It was about the trench showing you what it wants you to see. I didn't understand that until that morning. The captain whispered something to himself, so soft I almost missed it. "She's out there," he said. "She's been watching since the lights." He smiled faintly, not the kind of smile that belongs to someone still entirely human. When I looked closer, his reflection smiled before he did. It was small, a fraction of a second, but I saw it. My throat tightened, a cold sweat running down my spine. I blinked, and it was gone. Maybe I was tired, dehydrated, hallucinating. That's what I told myself, at least. But the longer I stared at the viewport, the more wrong it looked. The glass didn't just reflect light, it absorbed it. My face looked pale, washed out, and slightly delayed, as if the reflection were catching up to reality, a moment too late. The captain noticed me watching. "Don't look too long," he said. "It remembers faces." That night, I dreamed of mirrors, infinite, cold and filled with slow rippling water. I woke gasping, my helmet fogged with breath. The cabin lights flickered, bathing everything in a faint blue shimmer. I turned toward the viewport, and there, through the thick glass, I saw my own reflection looking back. Except it wasn't me. The eyes were open wider, the pupils dilated to black pits, and when I moved, it didn't. For several seconds, we just stared at each other. Then it raised its hand, slower, smoother, and pressed it against the inside of the glass. I stumbled backward, slamming into the controls. The captain grabbed my arm and hissed, "Don't touch it, don't acknowledge it." His voice trembled for the first time since we'd descended. I asked him what it was. He didn't answer, just repeated Rule 10, like a prayer. Never trust reflections in the glass. He shut off the viewport's outer lights and covered it with the emergency shield. The room fell into near darkness. the air thick and metallic, but even without light, I could still feel it, that faint presence, watching from the other side. Mateo's reflection was next. He'd been gone for nearly a day, but as we passed through a low trench canyon, his face appeared in the glass, faint and distorted, smiling faintly. The captain refused to look. "They come back as echoes," he said. "The trench keeps copies of whoever looks too long." My stomach twisted. Was that what happened to Clark? To Mateo? Were those faces in the glass just memories of the dead, or were they something else pretending to be them? I didn't know which answer scared me more. Later, as I adjusted the ballast controls, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye, a flicker of light that shouldn't have been there. I turned toward the viewport, and for a second, I thought I saw the surface, sunlight glinting through waves, clear and warm. I almost reached out before I realized the reflection was upside down. My breath hitched. The surface was below us. I yanked the emergency lever and sealed the outer viewing glass again, but not before I saw something shift in the reflection's depths. A silhouette, mimicking my every move, half a second too late. Hours passed, though the concept of time had started to dissolve down here. Every reflection looked wrong now. The polished steel, the small glass panels, even the navigation monitor, all of them had taken on a subtle shimmer, a quiet pulse that moved just slightly out of sync with reality. The captain began talking less and less, as if he knew something I didn't. Finally, I asked what happens if you break Rule 10. He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was barely a whisper. "You stop knowing which side you're on." That night, I caught my reflection smiling again. The lights were dimmed, the cabin silent, except for the soft groan of the hull. I wasn't moving, not even breathing, but my reflection tilted its head, a slow, unnatural motion, and its mouth curled upward. I froze. Then it lifted its hand and traced something invisible in the air, leaving behind a faint shimmer, like static underwater. The letters appeared backward, pressed into the fogged glass from the inside. "Look behind you." I didn't. Not at first. My heart hammered so hard it hurt, but curiosity won. I turned and saw nothing. Just the empty cabin, shadows draped over steel, the captain asleep in his chair. When I faced the glass again, the reflection was gone. Only my pale, trembling face stared back, breath fogging the viewport. I told myself it was exhaustion, that my mind was breaking under the pressure. But when I lay down to rest, I caught one last glimpse of the viewport's edge, and the faint outline of my reflection. Still awake, still watching. We drifted higher that day, trying to reach safer pressure levels. The air tasted stale. The walls creaked more often, like something brushing against the hull. I tried to avoid every reflective surface, but that became impossible. Even the condensation on the metal began to show faint mirrored images. Sometimes they were normal. Other times they stared back a second too long. Once when I blinked, I swear I saw Clark's face over mine. He mouthed something I couldn't hear. Then the condensation dripped away, and so did he. By the 5th day, I stopped trusting what I saw at all. The reflections didn't mimic us anymore. They predicted. They'd move before we did, smile before we spoke, glance toward things that weren't there yet. The captain started covering every reflective surface with tape and fabric. When I asked if it would help, he said, "No, it just slows them down." That night, I woke to the sound of scraping, soft, deliberate strokes from the inside of the viewport. The sound stopped when I looked. My reflection didn't. Now, as I record this, the glass is pulsing faintly again, like it's breathing. I keep seeing faint shapes behind my reflection, not faces, but outlines, flickering as though waiting for me to blink. I think I know what they want. They're patient, these things. They don't rush. They wait until you forget which reflection is real, until you start to trust the one on the other side. And when you do, they trade places. That's why Rule 10, never trust reflections in the glass, exists. Because the trench doesn't just take bodies, it takes likenesses. It copies what it sees and keeps it waiting, whispering through the mirrors, through the metal, through the water itself. The captain hasn't moved for hours. His reflection still has. I don't know which one of them is real anymore. All I know is that when I blink, mine smiles back. The submersible's interior felt smaller than ever. The walls pressed inward like the slow heartbeat of something massive surrounding us. The pressure gauge flickered, and I could swear I heard the groan of metal echo through the hull. We'd been down here too long. I kept replaying Rule 11, never surface alone, in my head like a mantra, even though I didn't yet understand why. It was supposed to be simple. Never ascend without someone beside you. But at this depth, simplicity was a lie. Nothing stayed simple in the trench. Jace sat across from me, pale, silent, eyes wide open but unfocused. He hadn't spoken since we lost the drone feed showing the lights below. Whatever we saw down there wasn't natural. 3 perfect orbs moving in unison, mimicking our formation. I told him to keep calm, that the lights were probably reflections, but I didn't believe it myself. When the drone's signal died, the silence that followed felt alive, like something had just been born in that darkness. I leaned toward Jace, trying to break the stillness. "We'll surface soon," I said quietly. "We just have to follow Rule 11, all right?" His eyes flickered toward me, but he didn't answer. I tried to ignore the tremor in my own voice. I kept thinking about the others who'd gone missing. Their submersibles found drifting at the surface, hatches sealed from the inside, no crew. The black boxes always recorded the same final phrase, whispered in terrified tones. "I thought you were right behind me." That was why Rule 11 existed. As we began our ascent, the depth meter clicked upward, but something felt wrong. The hum of the engine sounded slower, deeper, like the machine itself was struggling to climb. I checked the oxygen levels. Normal. Power. Normal. Yet I felt the same heaviness pressing on my chest as when we first descended. It was like the trench didn't want to let us go. When I turned back to Jace, he was smiling faintly, but his lips didn't move with the expression. It was the kind of smile you see in dreams, when someone familiar turns toward you and something's missing behind their eyes. I blinked and it was gone. He looked normal again, breathing shallow but steady. Still, I couldn't shake the unease. I told myself to focus on the controls, to keep my eyes on the depth gauge. But my reflection in the glass canopy caught my attention. 2 shadows behind me, even though Jace was the only other person here. I twisted in my seat, but the cabin was empty, except for us. The shadows vanished as if they'd never been. I reminded myself again, never surface alone. The phrase pulsed in my head, louder than my heartbeat. Halfway to the thermocline, the lights flickered out. Total blackness. For a moment I couldn't even see my hands. Then outside the canopy, faint illumination drifted upward from below. 3 orbs again. Perfectly aligned, perfectly still. My stomach turned. "We weren't alone, Jace," I whispered, but his head was tilted back, eyes rolled white. His fingers gripped the seat so tightly the knuckles were bloodless. I reached for his arm, and he was ice cold. Not dead cold, but the kind of cold that doesn't belong to living flesh. The orbs began to rise toward us, gliding like predators who knew we couldn't run. Every instinct screamed to accelerate, to escape, but the rule echoed louder, never surface alone. I couldn't leave him. I had to bring him back. I had to. The pressure gauge spiked suddenly, alarms shrieking through the cabin, red lights flooding the interior. Then just as quickly, silence returned. When the lights steadied again, Jace was sitting upright, staring straight ahead. He said softly, "You're not supposed to leave me." My blood froze. I hadn't spoken those words, but I'd heard them before, in the black box recordings. My breathing turned ragged. "We're leaving together," I managed. He smiled again, too calm, too slow. "Good," he said. "Then you'll see them too." His gaze shifted to the canopy. I followed it, and saw faces forming in the glass reflection, pale and stretched, mouths open like they were still screaming underwater. They looked like the missing crew. Their outlines shimmered in the glow of those impossible lights. My reflection was among them, except my reflection's mouth wasn't moving with mine anymore. I tried to shut down the ascent, to stabilize, but the controls wouldn't respond. The system had locked itself into emergency surfacing. The cabin filled with a low mechanical groan that seemed to come from inside my skull. Jace, or whatever he had become, stood and pressed his palm to the glass. Outside, the orbs drifted closer until they merged into one blinding sphere. I could see shapes moving inside it, silhouettes swimming, crawling, beckoning upward. They looked like us. The submersible jerked violently. A crack spidered across the canopy. My ears popped. I gripped the harness, shouting Jace's name, but he didn't turn. His reflection did though, smiling wider, whispering words I couldn't hear, but felt deep in my gut. Never surface alone. The phrase no longer sounded like a warning. It felt like an invitation. My chest burned as the oxygen thinned, my vision tunneling into faint red and black smears. Then the pressure equalized. The hull stopped creaking. The cabin lights stabilized once more. We were close to the surface now. I could see faint daylight rippling above through the distortion of the water. The orbs were gone. Jace slumped forward, motionless. For the first time I thought maybe it was over. Maybe the rule had saved me. Maybe staying with him was the only thing that kept whatever was down there from taking me too. But when I unbuckled and turned to face him, his seat was empty. The harness still held its shape, as if something invisible sat there. A faint handprint shimmered on the glass, fading slowly. Panic clawed up my throat. "You said we'd surface together," I whispered, but the words sounded wrong, like someone else was speaking through me. The surface light grew brighter. I reached for the manual override, and that's when I saw it in the reflection again. Jace, sitting exactly where he'd been, smiling faintly. Only this time he was behind my reflection, not beside it. We broke the surface with a burst of foam and sunlight. The pressure alarms went silent. I gasped in the open air, but it didn't feel right. The air tasted metallic, stale, like the ocean hadn't really let me go. I climbed out, pulling myself onto the deck of the retrieval ship. The crew wasn't there. The deck was slick, empty, as if they'd just stepped away moments before. The ocean was still around me, perfectly calm. Too calm. I turned back toward the submersible and saw two silhouettes inside, both of them waving slowly, like in farewell. I should have felt relief. Instead, all I felt was a growing certainty that one of those figures was me. I blinked hard, trying to focus, but the sun seemed to dim, shadows lengthening around the deck. The reflection of the sub wavered in the water, and for a split second, I saw the trench below again, the lights waiting, pulsing faintly, patient. Maybe Rule 11 wasn't about safety. Maybe it was about replacement. Maybe you were never supposed to surface alone, because what came up with you wasn't meant to be left behind. The horizon shimmered, and I could hear faint breathing behind me, slow, steady, familiar. I didn't turn. I couldn't. I just stared at the endless water and realized the truth I'd been avoiding. I wasn't the one who surfaced. I was the one still sinking. If you enjoyed this story, like, share and subscribe for more.